What did Etruscan temples look like?
Etruscan temples were greatly inspired by Greek architecture, and went on to influence Roman temple architecture. Etruscan temples were nearly square and raised on a tall foundation known as a podium. Built of mud bricks, about half of the temple was devoted to 3 interior rooms, and the other half was made up of a large porch supported by a double rows of columns. Columns were made either of wood, or volcanic rock called tufa. These relatively simple buildings were elaborately painted and decorated with architectural sculpture. Not on the pediment, as the Greeks would have done, but on the roof. Etruscan temple sculpture was made from terracotta, a challenging material to work with, and they precariously placed their pieces along rooflines and ridge poles. Overall, an Etruscan temple looks small and heavy, supporting a cast of terracotta gods and goddess milling around on its roof.
Who was Man Ray?
Born Emanuel Radnitsky, 1890 to 1976, in Philadelphia. Man Ray was a major contributor to both Dada and Surrealism, though he is most well known for his experimental photography. Man Ray was a painter, filmmaker, and writer. Like many other Dada artists, Ray was inspired by industrialism and the aesthetic qualities of machines, creating startling Dada objects such as gift. 1921, an iron with a row of sharp nails glued to the flat surface. He used tools more often associated with commercial art in his fine art projects, and was the first painter to use an airbrush, a process that fascinated him as it allowed him to create a painting without touching the canvas itself. Man Ray is notable for his experiments with a camera-less photographic process known as the photogram, but which he called the rayograph. With the rayograph, Man Ray could place an object next to light-sensitive paper to create automatic images. He also developed photomontages and mixed media photographs such as Le Violon d'Angre. 1924, perhaps his most well-known work. The title refers to the 19th-century French artist who often portrayed exotic women in his portraits. Man Ray's piece is a photograph of one of his favorite models, Kiki de Montparnasse, born Alice Prin, upon which he painted the F-holes of a violin, making her curving nude body reminiscent of a musical instrument. The image is oddly disturbing, as Kiki's arms are noticeably missing from view and she is transformed from a subject into an object.
What innovations were made by Euphronius?
Active in Athens between 520 and 470 B. CE, Euphronius was a vase painter who worked in the red figure style. The red figure style of ancient Greek vase painting developed. After the black figure style used by artists such as Exekias. Euphronius' work demonstrates a masterful ability to use the red figure technique to naturalistically depict the human form in multiple poses. Euphronius signed 18 of his vases, sometimes as a painter, and sometimes as the potter. One of his most famous works is a bowl-like calyx crater depicting the death of Sarpedon. c. 515 BCE. The story comes from Homer's Iliad and the painting shows the deities Hypnos and then Eidos, gods of sleep and death, respectively, carrying the dead body of the warrior Sarpedon. Hermes, the messenger god, holds a staff decorated with snakes called a caduceus, and wears a winged hat. Hermes watches over the scene and ensures the safe arrival of Sarpedon's body in the underworld. The figures in the dignified and detailed scene were rendered using foreshortening, an innovative technique in which body forms are distorted so that they appear to recede from the viewer, which creates 48 a sense of real space in the painting.
Why is Borobudur considered one of the greatest Buddhist temples in the world?
The mountain-like Borobudur is an enormous Buddhist temple built in the 9th century in Java, Indonesia, and not discovered by outsiders until the 19th century. Based on the stupa form, the temple is covered in ornate sculptures and staircases oriented to the points of the compass. The mountain form is no accident, it is in fact a key element of the temple's complex symbolism.
What is a yakshi?
A yakshi, an erotic goddess figure worshipped throughout India, represents fertility and vegetation. These sensual figures are used to decorate the exterior of the Great Stupa in Sanchi, India. The yakshi from Sanchi are partially clothed and are depicted holding onto mango tree branches, encouraging them to bloom. The curving poses of the yakshi were later adopted by Buddhist artists in their depictions of Buddha's mother giving birth.
How is pre-Columbian art in North America organized?
In North America, pre-Columbian art is divided into three major periods. Archaic period, ends in c. 1000 BCE. Woodland period, c. 300 B.C.E-1000 CE. Mississippian period, c. 900-1500 CE.
What is color?
Scientifically, color is the result of various wavelengths of light perceived by the human eye. The range of colors present in a rainbow, which transitions from red to violet, make up the visible spectrum. In art terms, the word color is interchangeable with the word hue. The primary colors, or primary hues, are red, yellow, and blue. Combinations of primary colors form all other hues. Two primary colors are blended to form secondary hues such as green and orange. There are even tertiary colors, which are made up of a blend of at least 3 hues.
What is humanism?
Though the term humanism wasn't invented until the 19th century. It refers to the rejection of medieval scholastic values and the new embrace of classical thought during the Renaissance. Humanism is also a way of thinking. An important part of humanist philosophy was education that focused on studying history, and emphasized personal ethics and civic values. Renaissance humanism resulted in a new emphasis on individuality. During the medieval period, art and literature tended to be viewed through a divine lens. From the perspective of God. During the Renaissance, by contrast, artists tended to take on a more human-centered view of the world.
What is the difference between weaving and tapestry?
Both terms represent a way to make cloth or fabric, though each requires a different technique. In weaving, a thread known as the warp thread is attached vertically to a loom while the weft thread is crisscrossed horizontally with the warp. Combinations of different colors and patterns create different textiles. Weaving has been around for thousands of years. The oldest woven cloth, discovered in Turkey, dates from 7000 BCE. Tapestry is a specific type of weaving in which the warps are hidden, and are often used for decoration and wall hanging.
What does Jane art look like?
Jainism is an important religion in India, in addition to Hinduism. Though only a small percentage of Indians are Jainists. Jainists believe in the cycle of death and rebirth, called samsara, and attempt to live pure, ascetic lives by looking inwards, avoiding material possessions, and acting kindly to others. At first glance, it may be difficult to distinguish Jain art from Buddhist and Hindu art. But one of the key types of Jain art is monumental nudes of meditating warriors, known as jinas. The ascetic Gammata in Karnataka, India, is an example of this. At around 60 feet tall, this 10th century, colossal sculpture represents Gammata, who was famous for meditating for years without stopping. The figure of Gammata stands at attention with poised shoulders, confident chin, and stoic face. The sculpture's nudity, along with images of tree branches and creepers that curl around his limbs, are meant to emphasize the jinas' focus on spiritual, rather than material needs. Sculpture such as the ascetic Gammata is used to aid Jainists in their own meditations.
Is graffiti considered art?
From a postmodern perspective, graffiti is as legitimate a form of visual expression as any form of fine art. Therefore, an oil painting is no more valid than graffiti, and both are considered art. Graffiti, which is often associated with vandalism and the illicit painting or marking of public spaces, has been part of painting for decades, if not longer. Artists such as Jackson Pollock and Jean Dubuffet, for example, incorporated graffiti-like markings into their work. In 1983, the first exhibition of graffiti art was held at Boijmans van Beuningen Museum in Denmark, a sign that graffiti was being accepted as a fine art. The artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, 1960–1988, began his career in the late 1970s as a graffiti artist, tagging buildings with short, poetic phrases, along with this friend, Al Diaz. The duo signed their work as Samo, Same Old Shit. In the 1980s, Basquiat developed a neo-expressionist style that incorporated graffiti elements, explored experimental music, and exhibited his work in galleries in New York City and Los Angeles. Another artist, Keith Haring, 1958–1990, also began his career by using chalk and magic markers to draw his dynamic cartoon images in public spaces, such as New York metro stations. Both Basquiat and Haring have achieved even greater success since their premature deaths. Basquiat of a heroin overdose and Haring of AIDS. As graffiti art and street art have received increasing mainstream attention,
What is acrylic paint?
acrylics are synthetic paints that have some of the features of oil paint and some features of watercolors. They are water-soluble, but some can be mixed with oil as well. Once acrylic paint dries, it can look quite similar to oil paint. Invented in the 20th century, acrylics are amongst the most popular type of paints used by modern and contemporary artists.
What was Chichen Itza?
Chichen Itza was an important pre-Columbian city built by the Maya and located in the eastern portion of the Yucatan Peninsula in modern-day Mexico. Chichen Itza is known for a large 9-level pyramid, which sits at the center of a main plaza. The pyramid is topped with a small, square temple accessible by 4 staircases, one on each side of the structure. The site also includes ball-playing courts, palaces, and an astronomical observatory. The city flourished between 800 and 1200 CE, which places it mostly in the post-classic period of the Maya, the period just before European conquest of the area. The buildings are decorated with bright, colorful paintings and painted relief sculpture. Popular themes include animals such as jaguars, coyotes, eagles, serpents, and mythological figures. Also found at Chichen Itza are chicmules. Altars in the shape of a reclining figure with hands resting at the sides. Chicmules are common throughout Mesoamerica.
What is the Codex Xuxnetal?
The Codex Xuxnetal, c. 1350 to 1400, is a folded pictographic manuscript from the post-classic Mixtec culture in Mexico, one of the few to survive. The 10-inch high manuscript, made of deer skin, contains about 46 folded pages and when stretched out reaches over 36 feet. Each side of the folded codex contains a different story. One telling the history of the Mixtec region, and the other explaining the genealogy and political successes of 8 Deer Jaguar Claw, a powerful 11th century Mixtec ruler. The Codex Xuxnetal is the oldest Mixtec history known by scholars.
What is watercolor?
While oil paints are made by mixing pigment with oil, watercolors are made by mixing pigment with water, usually for use on paper. Watercolors are applied in washes, which create a light, transparent area of color. Before the 19th century, watercolor was mostly used for quick sketches and was not considered to be as refined as other types of painting. However, perceptions of watercolor changed after John Ruskin, a famous 19th century art critic, promoted it, and the artist J.M.W. Turner, who also painted in oil, used watercolor for his dramatic and monumental paintings. Watercolor is still a popular medium used by artists around the world.
What tools did Paleolithic artists use?
Paleolithic artists used natural minerals to produce pigments in colors such as red, ochre, black, and brown. It is possible that these artists applied some of these pigments directly to the walls with their hands. But hollowed bones were likely used to spray paint onto the walls. Pigment-covered hollow bones have been found near some of the paintings by archaeologists. Other tools include chunks of moss or animal hair that would have served as a type of paintbrush. For carving, pieces of flint were used to make engraved lines.
What is Schroeder house?
Designed by Dutch architect Gerrit Rietveld, 1888 to 1964. Schroeder House is an example of vestigial architecture. In a way, Schroeder House, built in Utrecht in the Netherlands, is like a three-dimensional Mondrian painting with a geometric interior and exterior. A simplified color palette of neutral and primary colors, and specially designed furniture. The house also features large, rectangular windows and an open floor plan with sliding wall partitions, which emphasize horizontal and vertical lines. The design for Schroeder House inspired a style of architecture known as the International style.
What is the Dome of the Rock?
The Dome of the Rock is one of the earliest surviving mosques. Built at the top of Mount Moriah in Jerusalem during the Umayyad period, 661 to 750 C. The location is holy for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, and is thought to be the location of the creation of Adam, the place where Ibrahim, in Arabic, brought his firstborn son to be sacrificed, and the location of both Solomon and Herod's temples. In Islam, the location is also associated with the Prophet Muhammad's physical and spiritual journey to heaven, known as the Isra and Miraj. The Dome of the Rock is the third holiest site for Muslims. After the sacred mosque, Masjid al-Haram, in Mecca, and the Mosque of the Prophet, al-Masjid al-Nabawi, in Medina. The building itself features two large ambulatories that circle 66 exposed rock, which allows enough space for the many pilgrims who visit the shrine. Similar to the structure of a centrally planned church, this circular structure was commonly used in Christian religious architecture in Jerusalem at the time. The center of the building is topped with a large, golden dome supported by inner and outer wooden shells. 16 arched windows, stone piers, and interior columns. The columns, and their capitals, were constructed using recycled material from other classical monuments. The interior and exterior of the Dome of the Rock is covered in highly stylized mosaics, with vegetal and floral designs as well as calligraphic inscriptions. The Dome of the Rock is a powerful monument to Islamic faith, exuding both permanence and elegance.
What common images are found in Hindu iconography?
Hindu art includes a wide range of images, especially of important deities. The following table explains 4 important Hindu deities and their iconography. Shiva personifies both creation and destruction, embodies all of existence. Has over 1,000 names, is often represented as Lord of the Dance, often depicted as a phallus or pillar. If shown as human, can feature multiple limbs, matted hair, and a crescent moon above the head. Sometimes shown with a third eye and a trident, wears a serpent as a scarf. As Lord of the Dance, is shown surrounded by a ring of fire, Vishnu, preserver of order and balance in the universe. Takes the form of Krishna, a divine lover who battles the demon Kansa, often depicted with blue skin, shown riding Garuda, a large bird. Wears a tall crown and jewelry. Takes many different animal forms including a boar and a tortoise. Can also take the form of Krishna or Buddha. Devi, multiform female goddess worshipped as Parvati, wife of Shiva. Lakshmi, wife of Vishnu, and Radha, lover of Krishna. She also personifies anger as Durga. Takes numerous forms, each with a different identity. As Durga, she rides a lion. Ganesha, son of Devi, as Durga. Worshipped as the remover of obstacles. Shown with an elephant head.
What were the major art traditions of the woodland period?
The two dominant art traditions of the woodland period were the art of the Adena culture and the Hopewell. These cultures shared a number of visual motifs and symbols, and greatly influenced the art of other native North American cultures across the continent. Both the Adena and the Hopewell were known for building large-scale earthworks as well as smaller pieces of sculpture and jewelry. Often made from copper, or cut from mica, a layered silicate mineral. Because of the plundering of sites and an overall lack of documentation, a great deal remains unknown about the art traditions of the Adena and Hopewell.
Who were some of the abstract expressionists?
Willem de Kooning, 1904 to 1997. De Kooning was a Dutch immigrant to America, who greatly inspired the American artists he encountered in New York City. Considered part of the New York School of Abstract Expressionists. His work is characterized by aggressive brush strokes and partial abstraction. One of his most famous works is Woman I, 1950 to 1952, which he repeated a number of times. The painting depicts a large-eyed, aggressive woman with a wide, toothy smile and a wild, abstract form. The energy of de Kooning's work aligned the artist with action painters, and his work made a major impact on 20th-century American modernism. Arshile Gorky, 1905 to 1948. Gorky was an Armenian-American painter whose early Cubist Surrealist style influenced the abstract expressionists. His painting Garden in Sochi, c. 1943, shares similarities with the biomorphic abstraction of Henry Moore. Hans Hofmann, 1880 to 1966. Born in Germany, Hofmann was an art teacher who introduced a new American generation to European modernism. His work, as exemplified in The Gate, 1959 to 1960, is bold and colorful, and emphasizes visual structure and color relationships. Franz Klein, 1910 to 1962. Klein's work was large and he is particularly well known for his white canvases slashed with aggressive, black brush strokes. These works evoke Chinese calligraphy and draw attention to the dynamic power and structural qualities of the brush stroke. Robert Motherwell, 1915 to 1991. Motherwell was a member of the New York school and was inspired by Surrealist automatism and European modernism. He was a writer and a teacher, and had an intellectual approach to abstraction. He painted the series, Elegies to the Spanish Republic, throughout his long career. These works served as philosophical mediations on the nature of loss, death, and visual form. Lee Krasner, 1911–1984. Lee Krasner was an important abstract expressionist painter and the wife of Jackson Pollock. She was highly critical of her own work, even occasionally destroying finished pieces. She produced large, gestural paintings such as The Seasons, 1957. Barnett Newman, 1905–1970. Newman was an important color field painter whose work often features a zip or long, thin, vertical line of color painted against a boldly colored background. Newman's zip has been likened to an obelisk. Newman searched for the sublime through overwhelming fields of pure color. Jackson Pollock, 1912–1956. Pollock is one of the most enduringly popular abstract expressionists. Known for his aggressive painting style and technique of splattering paint directly onto the canvas. He laid his paintings flat on the ground, and walked over them with back bent, applying paint directly. While it seems like his paintings would be chaotic, their overall effect is often rhythmic and contemplative. Ad Reinhardt, 1913–1967. Reinhardt was known for making art as art, and emphasizing the separation between art and life. He distilled his paintings to a single color, and his later paintings are completely black, with no trace of a brush stroke. This was done in an attempt to completely separate the work from the act of its creation. Mark Rothko, 1903–1970. Rothko was interested in emotional and spiritual communication in his large color field paintings. The monumental canvases of Mark Rothko feature soft edge areas of rich color where different hues never quite touch one another, creating a tension Rothko linked to tension within human relations. Rothko's paintings are infused with spirituality and psychological ambiguity. Clyfford Still, 1904–1980. Still was also a color field painter. Though his works are more aggressive than Rothko's due to jagged areas of color, varied textures, and juxtaposed hues, his massive paintings have been equated with landscapes. Helen Frankenthaler, 1928–2011. Though she used oil and acrylic paint, Frankenthaler's large paintings have the look of watercolor, with stained canvas and large areas of fluid color. Staining produces an almost textureless open space within the canvas that garnered her the support of modernist critic, Clement Greenberg.
What is the Book of Kells?
The Book of Kells is one of the most famous illuminated manuscripts, and is an example of medieval art that blends pagan design with Christian themes. The Chi-Rho Iota, XPI, page of the Hiberno-Saxon Book of Kells is astonishingly complex. filled with twisting lines and curling spirals similar to the intricate metalwork found with the Sutton Hoo ship. Yet this page proclaims, "Now this is how the birth of Christ came about," as it introduces the Gospel of Matthew. In Greek, the letters chi, rho and iota, xpi, are the initials of Christ. Looking closely at the swooping forms of the Greek letters, one can find human forms incorporated into the abstract design. The letter P curls into a spiral and is punctuated with a sideways red-haired head, which also dots the eye of the nearby iota. This head is thought to represent Christ. Playful animals are also hidden within the design, including cats, mice, otters, and fish, all of which were likely symbolic, although the meaning has been lost over time. The beauty and richness of the Book of Kells demonstrates both the artistic skill and religious passion of the 9th century monks who produced it at the monastery on Iona, Scotland.
What is Viking art?
The term Viking art or Norse art refers to the art produced by the peoples of Scandinavia, which includes modern-day Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Much like Anglo-Saxon and Hiberno-Saxon art, Viking art featured the animal style. Early medieval Scandinavians also practiced memorial ship burials in which important people were buried at sea with their valuable earthly goods. The burial ship from Osberg, Norway, c. 834, was over 75 feet long, and contained the interred bodies of 2 women. As well the skeletons of around 10 horses. The front and back of the ship, the prow and stern, were formed into large spirals, and the ship itself is covered in intricate animal carvings, including dragons, which were popular motifs in Viking art.
Who was Grandma Moses?
Anna May Moses, better known as Grandma Moses, 1860 to 1961, didn't begin painting until she was in her 70s. When her arthritis was so bad that she could no longer sew. She is an example of a so-called naive artist, or a self-taught artist who has not been academically trained. Grandma Moses lived in rural New York, and first had her art displayed in a local drugstore, where she was discovered by an art collector. Her first solo show, held in 1940, was called What a Farm Wife Painted. Her work, primarily nostalgic landscapes of familiar places such as upstate New York, Vermont, and Virginia, became immensely popular, and has been copied in multiple formats from greeting cards to wallpaper to postage stamps. Among her collection of over 1,000 paintings are the Old Checkered House, 18th April 1949, and Down on the Farm in Winter, 1945, which are filled with small, lively figures and provide a nostalgic view of rural America.
What is the Pergame style?
During the 4th century B.C., Alexander the Great marched Greek culture over nearly half the globe, and when he died suddenly in 323 BCE, his vast empire fell into fragmented city-states and small kingdoms. One such kingdom, Pergamon, was located in present-day Turkey and became a leading city for art during the Hellenistic period. Art from Pergamon is known for being emotionally expressive and emphasizes acts of heroism. An example of the Pergamene style is a sculpture known as Gallic chieftain killing his wife and himself. The sculpture depicts a military victory over the Celtic Gauls in France. It was originally in bronze, and now exists only in Roman copies. The work romanticizes the death of the leader of the Gauls, who commits suicide rather than surrender to the Pergamese. His wife, who he has already stabbed to death, falls limp in his left arm as he turns away and plunges a sword into his own chest. This dramatic sculpture attempts to evoke a feeling of sympathy and admiration for the fallen chief, and is a powerful example of the expressive Pergamese style.
What was innovative about Durham Cathedral?
Norman architecture, also known as the English Romanesque, is punctuated by the dramatic heights of Durham Cathedral. Norman architecture is named for the Norsemen, Vikings, who settled in France, Normandy, converted to Christianity, and attacked the British Isles in 1066, with William the Conqueror as their leader. Durham Cathedral is evidence of William the Conqueror's Christian legacy as one of the tallest cathedrals in England. But it is not simply size that makes Durham Cathedral innovative. It is the manner in which Durham's builders were able to achieve such height, ribbed vaults,
What is significant about the standing male figure from Sangzingdui?
Shang artists, c. 1700 to 211 BCE, are well known for making bronze sculptures using the piece mold casting process. Especially bronze vessels for water, wine, and food. But, when the standing male figure from Sangzingdui was discovered, it astonished scholars and changed the way they thought about ancient Chinese art. More than 8 feet tall, this towering male sculpture is highly abstracted with a long, cylindrical body, jutting elbows, and large, circular hands. Nothing quite like this had ever been discovered, and scholars now think there may have been other significant art-producing cultures separate from the Shang dynasty during this time.
What is the Raimondi stela?
The Raimondi stela depicts a human-like jaguar deity and is an Example of Chavín-style art from the Peruvian Andes in South America. The Chavín culture, considered a mother culture to later Peru, developed between 1500 and 300 BCE. And Chavín-style art emphasized complex abstract patterns and featured animals such as jaguars and eagles. The jaguar creature carved on the Raimondi stela is known as the staff god. It is depicted wearing an elaborate headdress made from stacked, serpentine monster heads. This interweaving image emphasizes balance and symmetry in its abstract design.
What was the purpose of Emperor Qin's terracotta army?
Accidentally discovered in 1974 in Lintung, China, the massive burial monument for Emperor Qin Shi Huang contains over 7,000 life-size terracotta soldiers and horses, all standing in formation. Each soldier was painted and assembled from a series of molded parts, and therefore has a surprisingly realistic and individualized look. The burial chamber is as large and grand as the emperor's palace while he was alive, and is part of an ancient Chinese tradition of burying rulers with the wealth and the living staff they possessed during their life, much like the ancient Egyptians. The terracotta army protects the emperor and his material goods in perpetuity, serving their leader even after his death.
What is Islamic tile work?
Islamic art has a long tradition of decorative tile work, which was used to decorate the walls and other surfaces, both interior and exterior, of important buildings such as mosques and palaces. The 16th and 17th centuries were considered to be a golden age of Islamic tile work. Tile mosaics, in which glass or ceramic are organized into decorative patterns and then plastered, was one very popular technique. Another was known as dry cord tile work, also known as cuerdasica. First popularized in Spain during Umayyad rule. This process relies on large pieces of multicolored tiles, rather than smaller, individually colored fragments. Buildings such as the Imam Mosque to Isfahan, Iran, are covered in intricately patterned tiles in astonishing geometric and abstract forms.
How are Chinese characters formed?
Rather than referring to sounds like the English alphabet, the letters of the Chinese alphabet refer to entire words or ideas. These are called characters, or calligraphs. Like Near Eastern cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphs. Some Chinese characters started out as pictographs, which means the character resembles what it depicts. The Chinese language is extremely visual in that the form of the language also denotes meaning. And this made a major impact on Chinese art throughout history.
Who was Robert Rauschenberg?
Robert Rauschenberg, 1925 to 2008, along with Jasper Johns, his close friend, occasional lover, and business partner, was one of the most influential artists in pop art. And he is credited with leading art away from abstract expressionism. He is particularly famous for erasing a de Kooning drawing and then framing the empty page in a work he called Erased de Kooning Drawing, 1953.
What is an artist's medium?
The term medium, pl. media, refers to the materials used to create a work of art. Types of media can range widely, and include different types of paint, such as oil or acrylic paint, on canvas, as well as ink, marble, concrete, wood, glass, and metal. Artists also rely on various types of technology to create prints, photographs, videos, sounds, and digital images. The term mixed media refers to works that are made with more than one type of material. 20th century artist Robert Rauschenberg's combined pieces are a good example of mixed media work. His 1959 work, Canyon, is often referred to as a painting, but is made with oil paint, pencil, paper, metal, photograph, fabric, wood, for canvas. Buttons, mirrors, a stuffed eagle, a pillow tied with cord, and a paint tube.
What is art informal?
Art informal, also known as both Taschism and lyrical abstraction, was essentially the European equivalent of American abstract expressionism, with an emphasis on non-geometric abstraction, spontaneity, and expressive brushwork. In French, the word tâche, of Taschism, means splotch, referring to the manner in which paint has been blotted onto the canvas. Artists associated with art informal include Jean Fourier, 1898 to 1964, Hans Hartung, 1904 to 1989, and Alfred Otto Wolfgang Schulz, better known as Wols, 1913 to 1951. The work of Jean Dubuffet, which is associated with art brut, is also sometimes categorized as art informal.
What is American regionalism?
While some American artists and critics were enamored with European modernism, others like Edward Hopper, 1882 to 1967, Grant Wood, 1892 to 1942, and Thomas Hart Benton, 1889 to 1975, turned inward and examined American life during the 1930s and 1940s. The quiet, Lonely paintings of Hopper, such as his famous Nighthawks, 1942. A painting that depicts a brightly lit, if empty, restaurant interior on a dark night, evoke a sense of isolation. Iowa-born artist Grant Wood studied in Paris, where he was exposed to the realism of the Northern Renaissance. A realism that he infused into his now iconic painting, American Gothic, 1930. Which depicts a farmer couple, actually modeled by the artist's sister and a local dentist, who stand in front of their clapboard home. Exaggerated to have the look of a Gothic cathedral with long, pointed windows. Wood's painting glorifies the hard-working, American farmer. Thomas Hart Benton also memorialized the American worker in his series of murals. For the New School of Social Research in New York City, called America Today. American regionalism provided a comfortable depiction of America's heartland after the challenges of the Great Depression and World War II. Essentially a realist style, though also occasionally political. It fell out of favor as European-inspired modernism dominated the American art scene during the 1940s.
Are there any good documentaries about art?
There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of documentaries about art and artists. One of the best recent documentaries is Simon Schama's Power of Art, 2006, series, which does an excellent, and very entertaining, job of explaining the work of famous artists throughout history from the Renaissance to the 20th century. The PBS series Art, 21 is unparalleled in its presentation of art in the 21st century. Each episode of Art, 21, which is organized by theme, provides a look into the minds, and usually the studios, of artists working today. For a mix of Western and non-Western art, the series Art Through Time. A global view is also presented thematically, and includes information from art historians from around the world. It is often shown on local PBS stations. Check your local listings.
Who is Cindy Sherman?
Cindy Sherman, 1954, is a postmodern photographer known for her conceptual manipulations of media images and her use of self-portraiture. Sherman's photographs explore feminine identity and question the way women are portrayed in art and popular culture. In her series Untitled Film Stills, from the late 1970s and early 1980s, Sherman takes on the role of a female icon, a blonde bombshell such as Marilyn Monroe, and other stereotypical clichés. Her characters range from self-aware to subdued to comical. Her later work takes on art history. In Untitled number 224, Sherman becomes Bacchus, the ancient god of wine as imagined in the work of Baroque artist Caravaggio. Her eyes peering out from under a crown of grape leaves. Through her work, Cindy Sherman becomes the composite of the many images and film references she makes, leading the viewer to question the reality or artificiality of not only the artist's identity, but of the way in which subjects are portrayed in art and popular culture.
What is a Hopi Katsina figure?
The Hopi people, whose name means peaceful ones, are Native Americans from the American Southwest. In the Hopi religion, Katsinas, or Kachinas, are important benevolent spirits that personify natural elements in the real world. Representations of Katsina spirits are an important part of ritual dance. When Katsina dancers ceremonially impersonate the spirits, carved figures representing Katsinas are also an important part of the Hopi religious and artistic tradition. Carved Katsina figures can be given to children as presents and as educational tools. Katsina spirits are often associated with rain-bringing deities, or deities related to fertility or hunting. Hopi Katsina 232 figures are often made of carved cottonwood roots and decorated with feathers. They are painted with diverse patterns and symbols. For example, geometric patterns that symbolize water, and lightning bolts that symbolize rain and storms.
What is the calling of Saint Matthew?
The Calling of Saint Matthew, c. 1599 to 1600, is a highly naturalistic Baroque painting by Caravaggio, one of his most famous and enigmatic. The painting depicts a dark and dingy bar within which a group of young men sit around a table counting money. Suddenly, a beam of light pierces the darkness from the right. A figure of Christ appears, his hand raised much like Adam from Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam fresco in the Sistine Chapel. Christ points to Levi, the tax collector, whose face is covered in divine light.
What are the main characteristics of Gothic architecture?
Gothic architecture developed as a major European style in France in the middle of the 12th century and is characterized by the use of pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses. These structural forms allowed medieval masons to achieve never-before-seen heights and much thinner walls than seen in Romanesque churches, as well as the addition of huge stained glass windows, such as the rose window at Chartres Cathedral in France. Gothic architecture was enormously popular in Europe, especially in France. Until the end of the 15th century, and even into the 16th century in some countries. Though it was never particularly popular in Italy, which preferred the Romanesque style.
What is the Great Mosque at Gien?
also referred to as the Great Friday Mosque Etchen. The Great Mosque is the largest mud brick structure in the world. At least 3 main incarnations of the mosque have existed, including an original mosque from the 13th century, and 2 major reconstructions in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The city of Jan, located in Mali, was a sophisticated urban and religious center by the 13th century due to its location along Saharan trade routes, and the expansion of Islam. The Great Mosque at Jan is characterized by its smooth, beige walls constructed of sun-baked mud bricks. The bricks themselves were composed of clay and straw, as well as the many wooden poles that stick out from the walls. Due to the fragile nature of the mud bricks, the walls of the mosque are frequently rebuilt, and the wood supports allow workers to replaster the exterior. During a special annual festival in which the entire community participates. The grand design of the Great Mosque at Jan influenced Islamic architecture in other parts of Africa, including the Sudan.
Who is Shireen Neshat?
Shireen Neshat, 1957, is an Iranian-American photographer and video artist whose photographs frequently explore stereotypes of Muslim women. Her later video work, including Tuba, 2002, and Logic of the Birds, 2002, explores spiritual themes through Quranic symbolism and music.
What is Chartres Cathedral?
Chartres Cathedral is perhaps the preeminent example of Gothic architecture in the world. Construction began in 1134 about 50 miles southwest of Paris. After a fire in 1194, Chartres was under construction until 1260. The cathedral features intricate relief sculptures depicting the Last Judgment over the west portal, entry doors, monumental stained glass windows, and 2 mismatched towers, one of which was built in the early 16th century. The figurative sculptures on the exterior of Chartres are so lifelike. They seem to jostle and look to one another in conversation. Upon entering the building, the arcades appear weightless, the walls soaring, thin, and delicate. Warm, colored light filters into the nave through the rose window where biblical narratives emanate from rich, glass panes. The aim of the Gothic architects of Chartres and other cities in Europe was to make manifest divine light from heaven. And here, it does appear as if they succeeded.
What is the significance of the meeting house in Pacific cultures?
Meeting or ceremonial houses are a significant part of Pacific architecture, and many Pacific cultures use these larger halls or houses for religious or rite of passage ceremonies. For example, the Abalam people of the East Sepik province in New Guinea display art and ritual objects in ceremonial houses in order to attract spirits during rituals. Abalam ceremonial houses are traditionally decorated with art objects made in a variety of materials, including fruit, leaves, stones, and shells. On the island of New Ireland, ceremonial houses are essential for Malagan. Ceremonies and wood sculptures are carved and displayed at the front of the house. In the mid-19th century, master carver Rahara Hirukipo supervised the construction of Te Haukituranga, a Maori meeting house in Gisborne, New Zealand. The house, a type known as a warinui, is covered in detailed high-relief wood carvings that have been rubbed with shark liver oil and red clay to produce rich color and luminescence. Along the 234 A-frame ceiling, is a repeating pattern of painted wood rafters and lattice panels, which were made by women artisans. Though the nature of the carvings is traditional, they were done with European-style metal tools during a time in the colonial 19th century. As Maori architecture was changing under the influence of Christianity, meeting houses across the Pacific serve as important locations for community meetings, rituals, and other ceremonial uses. Their construction is inextricably related to the creation of art objects, and to both the political and spiritual function they serve within a culture.
What is the sublime?
During the 18th century, philosophers established three different categories of aesthetics: the beautiful, the picturesque, and the sublime. In 1763, Immanuel Kant, philosopher of the German Enlightenment, wrote observations on the feeling of the beautiful and sublime, and in this treatise, he described beauty as relating to formal harmony, while the sublime related to intangible awe and a feeling of being overwhelmed. Edward Burke explained the concept of the sublime in the Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, 1957, when he wrote, "Whatever is fitted in any sort to excite the ideas of pain and danger, that is to say, whatever is in any sort terrible, is the source of the sublime," as quoted in Pierce 93. An interest in the grandeur and vastness of the aesthetic experience, the concept of the sublime mirrored the values and interests of the Romantic movement, emphasizing emotion, mystery, and the imagination.
What is Ottonian art?
Ottonian art is a term that refers to the art and architecture produced under a new, powerful dynasty that established itself in the eastern portion of the Holy Roman Empire after the power of the Carolingian dynasty had faded. Three main rulers, Otto I, Otto II, and Otto III, ruled from 919 to 1002 and were based in modern-day Germany. During the Ottonian period, the arts flourished and new innovations in architecture, metalwork, and ivory carving were key elements in the so-called Ottonian Renaissance.
Who was William Blake?
William Blake, 1757 to 1824, was a deeply religious English printmaker, painter, and poet who disliked the formal training of the Royal Academy and spent his career working on highly imaginative projects, including a series of prophetic books modeled after the Bible, which he wrote and illuminated. Blake did not believe in drawing from life, and naturalism was not his goal. He drew on his imagination for visual cues, and his works are complex, thematic, and often influenced by the style of medieval manuscripts. He created his own mythology that included characters such as Urizen, a name derived from the phrase, your reason, who embodies rationality. In one of his most enduring images, the Ancient of Days, 1794, which is also often called God creating the universe, Blake blends the styles of Michelangelo with medieval iconography to depict the bearded figure of Urizen reaching down from the clouds, his open hand extending into the form of a compass that glows with yellow light from heaven. While Michelangelo's images of God are graceful and all-powerful, Blake conceived of Urizen as a complex, negative force, and his The Ancient of Days is bathed in deep red and dark tones. William Blake's art was not particularly well received during his lifetime, but garnered much critical attention about a century after his death. He is now considered one of the most important English artists in history, a significant romantic artist who felt dissatisfied with the promises of the Enlightenment and the values of neoclassicism.
What are pastels?
Pastels are a popular medium used for drawing. To make pastels, gum or resin is added to pigment and formed into the shape of a small stick. When pastels are applied to a surface, the colors can appear powdery and can be smeared or blended with the tip of a finger. When completed, pastel paintings need to be fixed with a spray or the colors can smear, though these sprays can sometimes cause discoloration. Edgar Degas and Mary Cassatt are famous Impressionist artists known for their use of pastels.
What is the Church of Tugusu?
Built in the late 16th century by Giacomo della Porta, the Church of Il Gesù has what is considered to be the first Baroque facade in architecture. The church was built in Rome for the order of the Jesuits. Its plan was similar to the traditional cruciform basilica plan, with a long nave and aisles. It was topped with a cupola, a small dome. More shocking at the time was the church's exterior. The fagade is divided into 2 stories and blends Roman, Greek, and Renaissance architectural motifs such as doubled pilasters, engaged columns, arched pediments, triangular pediments, niches, windows, Corinthian capitals, and large, scrolling volutes. Despite the many disparate elements, the church fagade is not overwhelming or chaotic. Patterns emerge to create a rich, unified space. The ornamental fagade of the Church of Il Gesù greatly inspired the elaborate architecture of the Baroque period.
What is Great Zimbabwe?
Great Zimbabwe was an important capital city of the Bantu-speaking Shona people between the 12th and 15th centuries, reaching its peak between 1250 and 1450 with an estimated population of approximately 15,000 people and control over a large territory. Covering an area of nearly 2,000 acres, the ruined city of Great Zimbabwe is principally comprised of 3 structures: the hill complex, the valley ruins, and the great enclosure, which are surrounded by a large protective wall, nearly 30 feet tall. The great enclosure, which dates from the mid-14th to 15th century, was made with a special pattern of dry stone blocks, a technique still used by contemporary builders, and is the largest stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa. Many sculpture and pottery fragments have been found at the Great Zimbabwe site, indicating a rich art culture. A popular material for sculpture was soapstone, and many examples of soapstone bird carvings have been discovered. Though the exact significance of these sculptures is still unknown.